It's an underwater machine. It's an underwater machine. It is. This is an underwater machine. This is an underwater jackpot. We're trying to simulate a jackpot. Jackpot. Jackpot happening underneath water. So now we will try to simulate somewhat of a process where we're illustrating an under the water jackpot in a slot machine happening for the purpose of developing a mindset that has to do with somewhat of an asset-only mindset, but it only has to do with something more of this kind. It's a bit peculiar, but what we want to try to do is develop something called surfing, a surfing mindset. We're trying to close the gap. We're trying to make this like a loop, like this podcast to be somewhat like a loop, and I guess like a TED Talk at the same time. It's a little bit like a TED Talk. We're trying out the operatic voice. It's a little bit peculiar. It's a little bit strange. We're trying to actually go on the higher end of the operatic voice, like this side of the operatic voice. But it's going to take some time to try to get to that high side to be able to try to develop continuity within this type of a podcast. So it might still be a little bit audible to be able to listen to what's actually being said, and I will try to work on it. Nonetheless, if this is a fictitious type of a TED Talk, then in essence what we're trying to do in this utility factor in terms of this podcast in a specific sense is to be able to try to develop somewhat of a closed circuit loop in terms of since the beginning of this podcast, so that in essence this TED Talk stands for like an actual TED Talk where we're trying to develop a relevance within all the past conversations within this podcast. In essence, how do we do this? We're going to, little by little, be able to try to close the loop. We're trying to close the loop and develop somewhat of a, hopefully like a jackpot mindset, like an asset mindset, like a mindset where when you flip on actions and action taking, that in essence you're trying to stay in an asset mode. It's like an asset mode, like you're in a bit of an asset mode. When you get in this asset mode, you want to stay in this asset mode is the idea. That's the hope. That is the purpose of Dinky Tech, the Dinky Tech mindset. That's the purpose of Dinky Tech and Chase for Game Studios, is a process that develops asset mindsets and assets that come from the asset mindsets on a continuous habitual basis. And so at the same time, we're trying to leverage this concept to be able to continue to be able to unfold actions that are able to leverage differing assets as a result of the different actions that we're trying to focus on. So there's literally the two primary focuses in terms of developing assets is sales and investing. So we're trying to leverage both arms in the future as we try to continue to travel a little bit, as we try to continue to go overseas, that we're trying to be able to focus on developing the asset mindset while developing the schedule that has to do with actions, that has to do with continuous asset emissions coming from the actions that we're trying to take. And in essence, the very first podcast that we started out with was called the Hovercraft Skateboard Spreadboard. So the Hovercraft Skateboard Spreadboard. Back when it first started. We first started talking about the Hovercraft Skateboard Spreadboard. And so as a result, now we are in a context where we're developing a hyperloop. In this context, in this podcast, we're developing a hyperloop. In this hyperloop episode, what we're trying to do is close the circuit from the beginning of this podcast and develop a new future pipeline for forward direction, forward motion. But we're trying to leverage the concept of a hyperloop, and we're trying to develop what has happened in the past to be able to leverage that, laying down the tracks into the future for the hyperloop. The hyperloop is a symbol for having an enclosed circuit space where air is not influencing the process of the hyperloop, and so therefore things can travel at a much higher speed and a much higher rate of existence because it's not influenced by the outer limits of the outside world, and the outside elements form the outside world. So how we're trying to do that is by closing the circuit from the beginning of the podcast to now and testing out the nature of a hyperloop in this podcast going forward by developing also the SRF and a surfing mindset and an SRF mindset. So we're leveraging the concept of the hovercraft skateboard to be able to leverage what is called the Dinky Tech hovercraft skateboard in this episode, because we're bringing back that hovercraft skateboard to now leverage it as a mental tool so that in essence it's possible to be able to leverage that hovercraft skateboard. So now you're using it within the hyperloop. The hyperloop also is something that entails different wavelengths of effective motion. And in essence, Dinky Tech is trying to leverage the place where he's at now to be able to leverage it in the future, to be able to have this mindset where he's developed the combination of having this process where, in essence, he's able to jump from wavelength to wavelength to wavelength in terms of focuses, in terms of attention, to be able to go from wavelength to wavelength, to be able to develop actions on a day-to-day basis, jumping from wavelength to wavelength. So where it's like you're surfing within the closed hyperloop, in essence. But at the same time, as you continue to jump from one wavelength to another with your attentions, it's like you're on different colors. It's like the color-coded attention spans, basically. But at the same time, all of those color-coded attention spans are all individual electricities. At the same time, they're all individual electricities. All of individual electricity. So at the same time, what we need to do is focus on how to be able to jump from wavelength to wavelength to wavelength to wavelength, and at the same time develop an ongoing continuous motion so that in essence, the Dinky Tech and Change for Game Studios energy is able to scale in the future, so that in essence, what we're talking about is being able to have this mindset because we've been developing over time. We've had the ability to develop different wavelengths on each chord of the focuses so that each chord of the focuses, in essence, is something that is synthesized that has to do with a specific train of thought, but at the same time, each of the wavelengths on the track, the train of thoughts that are jumping from one wavelength to another, are all synthesized into different action groups. They're all groups of actions that are synthesized into mainframe wavelengths. In essence, mainframe wavelengths. And we've done this so we can develop the system. So the Dinky Tech and Change for Game Studios going forward is trying to develop a sales and investing mindset so that we can develop a way to consistently be able to add and breed value into the context of the globe, into the context of the world, by leveraging sales and investing, those two arms, and continuing to be able to develop this process to where we are able to continue to develop pipelines for different asset energy to be able to pipeline into the global philanthropy energy grid, which in essence is something that we're developing by being able to jump from one wavelength to another, and staying on the asset mindset. So we're actually using our actions as opposed to our words in this podcast so that in essence our future actions are able to try to translate directly into asset energy, and then we're able to continually try to just grow the value of the financial aspect of the company, but at the same time, the reality of the more so of the media type of scenario to where we're adding value on both contexts by selling with some media and then at the same time leveraging the ability to do more in terms of investing at the same time, and leveraging our processes to also leverage investing and investing methodologies by leveraging dividends and dividend channels and channeling out different dividends as different dividends happen because it's an ongoing asset mindset and energy that in essence it's meant to be consistently unfolding forever. That's the hope, that's the intention, that's the purpose, and everybody is able to do this at the same time so that we can all synergize. But Dinky Tech and Change for Game Studios is trying to leverage this as an initial process to be able to leverage this as an initial process in this process to be able to try to prove the process in essence by getting into this mindset by developing the hyperloop, which is a closed loop, which has the ability to then be able to transmit this mindset for future going processes as almost like an analogy for something that is like a closed loop process, because we've tried to leverage almost this podcast at the same time as like an analogy also for closing the loop over the short and the long term to be able to try to close the loop, having then therefore as we move forward into new locations, the ability to then, therefore, be able to transition this mindset into consistent actions and have all of the actions every single day, all the time, to be able to transition into the foundational entrepreneurship mindset, to be able to have all those actions transition into the foundational entrepreneurship mindset that also cause reactions or effects, in other words, that have the ability to cause results, cause asset results. And it takes a long time to be able to tune this engine. It's taken a long time of focus, and the way it is, in essence, has more or less over the course of time been individually developing individual strings of focus over the short and the long term in the past, basically, but grouping all of those strings of focus at the same time into other groups so that they're big strings with other strings intertwined next to them and in with them, basically, almost like a guitar, but like each string on the guitar has like 6 or 4 or something or 7 different strings rolled into one string. So it's like 6 times 7 of basically that. And then so that's the sort of the mindset development analogy aspect process by developing a consistent ability to try to synthesize, restring, develop 6 or 7 strings for each individual string, and then be able to synergize and retest and recalibrate each string. So that ability for every human to do that is possible by just leveraging the highest frequencies of focuses that consistently come about, by consistently focusing on consistent focuses that come across as asset feelings. Asset feelings are something that when you're living your day-to-day life, it comes across as an asset feeling. It feels like an asset. It might be. And then so you test the asset like if it is an asset energy. Anyways, that kind of also comes full circle into the concept of developing channels from dividends. Dividend channels, channels from dividends, dividend channels, channels from dividends, dividends. Dividend channels meaning channels that come from and are derived from the essence of, in essence, from dividend channels, dividends coming out like energy coming out like dividends. And so you take the dividend energy and you parse it out into different directions, like wires, like wires, in essence. So yes, you parse it out like into wires, in essence, and so this is how we're somewhat have been developing the framework for the mindset for Dinky Tech and Chase for Game Studios. And so this is a kind of a symbol of trying to close the loop for the system to just finally be able to try to run the energy and, in essence, use our hovercraft skateboard, which is from the first episode of the podcast, to be able to run that hovercraft skateboard in theory, in an analogy, in a symbolic way, in this podcast, in this mindset, in this visualization, to be able to run it through the hyperloop, which is in essence also an analogy for all of the roots and the root networks that have to do with the whole world and all of nature and every single plant that exists and every single cell that exists, and get really small. And so this basically is able to conceptually scale and consistently scale because of like little microscopic robots, in essence, that are symbolized by the Dinky Tech energy. The Dinky Tech energy, in essence, is symbolized in this hyperloop context by scaling up this model and methodology that Dinky Tech, as the mascot and founding frequency, in essence, is able to be scaled by, is leveraging the nature of this conceptually scalable energy. And so if we're able to get into the mindset of this frequency and this energy, then we need to consistently go back into the mindset of the focus of being able to try to continue to scale this process by sending all this energy into the hyperloop. And this hyperloop is, in essence, a symbol for microscopic robots being released into the pipelines of the world through nature and through nature's little aggregate vessels that go through all plants and all of nature to consistently be able to continue to continue to be like a jackpot in theory, like a jackpot under the water that's bubbling like to make consistent energy for the world to be able to consistently be able to continue to make asset energy from Dinky Tech and Change for Game Studios as a company, as a brand, as a business, as a continuous business, as we continue to combine and connect with other collaborations and other collaborative energy. We'll not only try to do more music, but more business music around the world by continuing to try to connect our energies with other humans that also have the ability to develop their own closed-loop system, and therefore will develop continuous and consistent and ongoing perpetual philanthropy energy collaboration synergies, consistent collaborative energies. Energies around the world. Synergies. Because just as Dinky Tech and Change for Game Studios developed this closed loop system, we developed this closed loop system, which has to do with closing the loop, and the different wires that we're jumping from one piece to another has to do with symbols for actions, to be able to take those actions to be able to sell through either a job or a mechanism such as a job in this near far future, to be able to leverage sales and investing at all given times to be able to continue to widen the process. And every human has both those, typically are both, the two are like right and left side is a symbol for the right and left sides of using sales and investing energies, in essence, and all humans have that. So in essence, you have to have a process for developing just by leveraging the highest points of focus and frequencies that every human experiences, develop their own sort of a guitar. Every human develops their own guitar, in essence, and so they have their own mind frame, and so we're giving the gift of the hovercraft spreadboard within this podcast today, to give this hovercraft skateboard spreadboard within this podcast today, to gift that and give that hovercraft skateboard spreadboard away from the very first episode of the Dinky Tech and Nature of Love podcast, so that in essence it's given away in this podcast, so that in essence everybody has the ability to just know that they can create their own guitar framework of pipeline of closed hyperloop system mentality to add to the global philanthropy energy grid, and everybody's able to combine with this mindset and this element of also repurposing dividend energy. Dividend energy, as you continue to develop as an asset energy, you get dividends back, and so you continue to repurpose those dividends into different channels, and the ability to leverage the ability to repurpose those energies into different pipelines of focuses and repurpose different systems and systematization for being able to contribute to the global philanthropy energy grid and making the most philanthropy energy possible by continuing to develop asset exhaust from the vehicle that you're developing as you develop this six string intertwined process like a guitar, in essence, in your mind, like a closed loop aspect of focus, and you can ride this hovercraft skateboard in your brain, in your mind, to continue to stay in an action focus mindset that is continuous and asset mindset focus action asset mindset action asset focus mindset asset action asset focus mindset, because it's actions that make the reactions, it's actions that makes the effects into the world to cause the global philanthropy energy grid. And we all need, every human being, all 8 billion people, to be able to activate this pipeline of focus in their own hyperloops, to be able to build their own hyperloops by now having their own hovercraft skateboard spreadboard, hovercraft skateboard spreadboard, hovercraft skateboard spreadboard. Basically, everybody gets their own hovercraft skateboard spreadboard in this episode so that they all can make their own hyperloops all around the world to also connect into all of nature's roots, to then therefore be able to add value to the global philanthropy energy grid. And also when it's making sales and investing, to then therefore be able to redirect different dividend energies into different pipelines of channels of reinvesting and evaluating investing processes and sales and investing processes hand to hand to continue to develop asset energies around the world, asset energies all together. Altogether we develop this process, and at the same time, we can now all close the loop. Together and make the most philanthropy energy in the philanthropy energy grid together as possible in the whole entire world, by developing philanthropy as the primary focus for all human beings to be able to focus around as we continue to unfold our hyperloop process and continue to expand using artificial intelligence, our dinky tech hyperloop robots into all of nature, starting with us as a process, and everybody else getting a hyperloop and a hovercraft skateboard at the same time today. Yeah. Whoa. Thanks again, Dinky Tech. Bye, peace, bye. Thanks again, Dinky Tech. Bye, peace, bye. Dinky Tech, Change for Games Studios. Dinky Tech, Change for Games. Bye, peace, bye.